I will never forget that evening. It was supposed to be a small family gathering, or at least, that's what I thought. I arrived a little late, caught up in traffic, and the moment I stepped into the living room, the first thing I felt was the chill. No one turned their head, no one greeted me, not a single smile. Only the sound of laughter, loud and full, coming from my mother and my new sister-in-law, Emma. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe they were just caught up in their conversation. I tried to shake it off, but as I scanned the room, looking for an empty seat, my heart slowly sank. There wasn't a seat for me. Everyone had settled comfortably around the dining table. Even the one free chair next to my brother had been buried under a pile of coats. Almost like an afterthought. Accident. I wondered. I stood there for a moment, awkward and invisible. The kind of moment that stretches unbearably long in your mind, but barely registers for everyone else. Finally, I dragged an old wooden chair from the corner and sat away from the table, near the cold window. Dinner unfolded noisily, full of laughter and clinking glasses. Everyone shared stories about vacations, new jobs, future plans. No one asked me anything. No one even looked my way. I might as well have been a ghost. I let my gaze wander to my mother. She was laughing with Emma, her face lit up with pride I hadn't seen directed at me in years. They leaned close, whispering and smiling like co-conspirators. I sat still, feeling the isolation press in tighter with every second. And then it happened. In the middle of a story, Emma casually lifted her hand, flashing a sparkling ring on her finger. "Mom gave this to me," she said proudly, practically glowing. "It's a family heirloom she's been saving for someone special," she said. "It should go to someone who truly deserves it." The words hit harder than any slap, because I recognized that ring immediately. It was my grandmother's wedding ring, the one my mother had promised to me when I got married one day. Everyone in the family knew it. It was never a secret. My grandmother had wanted it that way, her final gift to me. And now, there it was, shining brightly on Emma's finger, like it had always belonged to her. I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. I turned to look at my mother. She avoided my gaze, pretending to listen intently to whatever Emma was saying. Applause broke out, laughter, congratulatory hugs, as if nothing cruel had just happened in plain sight. I sat frozen, fingers digging into the fabric of my dress, leaving crescent-shaped marks on my palms. It was more than just a ring. It was a memory, a promise, a piece of love that had been quietly erased without a word, without a thought. And no one, not a single soul, noticed how shattered I was inside. I could have screamed. I could have confronted them right then and there, but I didn't. I stayed silent. Silent, but not broken. Not this time, because what they didn't know was that I had finally reached my breaking point. That night, when I finally left the gathering, the air outside felt colder than it should have been. I walked to my car slowly, letting the sharp night wind bite my skin, trying to anchor myself, trying not to cry. I didn't cry. Not then. I had cried enough already over the years, over the endless moments that felt just like this. As I sat in the driver's seat, hands trembling against the steering wheel, the memories came flooding back, uninvited and merciless. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't new. This was just the final confirmation of something I had refused to admit for years. I was never truly one of them. Not really. Growing up, my younger brother, Nathan, had always been the golden child. It wasn't his fault entirely. He didn't ask for the pedestal they placed him on. But every birthday, every holiday, every major life event, the difference was there, painfully obvious. His celebrations were grand, full of gifts and congratulations. Mine were polite at best, sometimes forgotten altogether. I remembered one birthday, my 16th, when I waited all day for someone to say something, anything, a cake, a card, a hug. Instead, my mother was too busy organizing a surprise party for Nathan's promotion at work. I stood in the corner, smiling for pictures, clapping when they sang for him, pretending it didn't hurt. But it did. It built up, year after year, like tiny paper cuts across the soul, small enough that no one else saw the blood, but deep enough that you never fully healed. I used to wonder what I had done wrong. Maybe if I was smarter. prettier, more agreeable. Maybe if I didn't speak up so much. Maybe if I said yes more, demanded less, stayed quieter, faded better. I lived my life trying to be easier to love, trying to mold myself into someone they could finally be proud of. But the truth was simpler and crueler. They had already decided who mattered more. And it wasn't me. The night Emma flashed that ring, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a loud, glittering confirmation. A final, shining announcement that whatever promises they had made to me, whatever tiny pieces of affection they had dangled before, meant nothing at all. I could almost hear my mother's voice echoing from years ago. Soft and dismissive. Don't make a scene. Don't be so sensitive. You should be happy for your brother. Happy. For losing the one thing that connected me to my grandmother. Happy. For being erased so cleanly, so effortlessly, that no one even noticed I was hurting. Driving home that night. But that day was never coming. And the saddest part, even now, after everything, a tiny piece of me still wanted it, still wished, against all reason, that it could be different. But wishing wasn't enough anymore. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, a slow, quiet click, like a lock turning. Not anger, not even rage, something colder, heavier, a decision. I wasn't going to keep chasing their approval anymore. I wasn't going to pretend this didn't hurt, or that it didn't matter. I wasn't going to be their silent, convenient afterthought. They had taken my ring. They had taken my memories. They had taken my place. But they weren't going to take my voice. Not this time. Not ever again. And as I pulled into my driveway, stepping into the dim, lonely light of my own porch, I knew the next time they saw me, they would see someone very different, someone they couldn't erase so easily. Because the thing about silence is, it doesn't mean forgiveness. Sometimes, it's just the sound of a storm gathering strength. The days after that night blurred together, I moved through them like a ghost in my own life, going to work, coming home, avoiding phone calls, ignoring invitations. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to ask. That hurt in a way I can't even explain. It wasn't just the loss of the ring. It was the loss of any lingering illusion that I ever truly mattered. The silence became my armor. I wore it tightly, wrapping it around every wound they had left open. At work, I smiled and nodded at meetings. At home, I organized my things with mechanical precision, sorting through drawers, cleaning closets, boxing up memories that no longer felt safe to keep in plain sight. One afternoon, while digging through an old wooden chest tucked away at the back of my closet, I found something I hadn't thought about in years: my grandmother's letters. They were folded neatly, her handwriting still clear and elegant despite the faded ink. Reading them, I felt her voice again, soft, wise, full of a love so pure it hurt. In one letter, she had written, "One day, you'll understand, sweetheart. Some people love you for what you give them, but the ones who matter love you for who you are." I sat there on the floor for a long time. The letters spread around me like a fragile shield, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel it all. The grief, the anger, the profound loneliness. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere along the years, but I felt a sharp clarity slice through the numbness. I wasn't wrong for wanting to be loved. They were wrong for withholding it like a prize to be earned. And then, almost like fate, came the phone call. It was my mother. Her voice, light and casual, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't handed my most treasured heirloom to my sister-in-law without a second thought. Like I was still supposed to smile and thank her for crumbs. "We're having a small get-together this weekend," she chirped. "Family only. You'll come, won't you?" I should have said no. I should have hung up. But instead, something colder and sharper inside me said, "Go, not to forgive, not to forget, but to remember and to reclaim whatever pieces of myself they had tried to take." I agreed, voice steady. And for the first time in years, I wasn't going there to seek their approval. I was going to watch, to listen, to see the truth laid bare. That night, I pulled out a small, nondescript notebook from my desk drawer. It was time to start keeping records. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved to have the truth in my own hands. No more lies, no more gaslighting, no more pretending. They thought I would stay the same, small, grateful for whatever scraps they threw me. But they didn't know that the silent girl they had ignored for decades was gone. All that was left now was someone they had created piece by piece, with every slight, every betrayal, every stolen birthday and forgotten milestone. And this time, I wasn't coming to beg for love. I was coming to take back what was mine. I didn't know yet how. I didn't have a plan fully formed. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the years of silence and careful obedience, a storm had started to gather. And soon, it would break. The gathering was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, a casual family lunch, my mother had said, like it was nothing. But for me, it felt like walking into a battlefield, not one with shouting or weapons. No, theirs was the quiet kind of war, all cold smiles, veiled barbs, and long silences that said everything words dared not. I arrived 5 minutes late, on purpose. I wanted to see if anyone would notice, if anyone would care. They didn't. The living room was full. Laughter, clinking glasses, the faint smell of overcooked roast drifting through the air. My brother stood by the window, arms around his wife, the wife who now wore a delicate gold ring on her right hand, flashing as she gestured animatedly. I recognized it instantly. My ring, not on a chain, as a keepsake, not tucked safely away in a box. No, she wore it like it was hers, laughing, sipping wine, basking in a world that had never, ever been offered to me. And my mother, she was standing right beside her, admiring the ring, admiring the betrayal. It was like being slapped without a hand even touching me. I sat down quietly in a corner armchair, unacknowledged. I watched, listened, took mental notes. Every little detail sharpened the blade inside me further. When dinner was served, there wasn't a seat for me at the main table. Of course not. An extra chair was brought in hastily, squeezed awkwardly at the end, half in the hallway. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully predictable. They didn't see me. They never had. And now, they wouldn't see what was coming either. Halfway through dessert, my brother tapped his glass with a fork and cleared his throat. "We have an announcement," he said proudly, grinning at his wife. "Pregnant." Of course. The room erupted in cheers. Congratulations! Hugs. My mother wiped away tears of joy. My father clapped my brother's back proudly. And me. I sat there, invisible as always. Invisible, except for the burning weight of the ring on her hand, catching the light with every move she made. Later, when people drifted into smaller conversations, I slipped quietly into the study. The one room no one really used anymore. I opened the drawer in the old mahogany desk. I don't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe desperation for something, anything, to anchor me. Inside were old documents, papers yellowed with age, bills, deeds, and then, tucked between two dusty folders, I found a worn envelope with my name on it, not my brother's, not my sister-in-law's, mine. My hands trembled as I slid it open. Inside was a letter, handwritten by my grandmother, a different one from the ones I had found at home. This one was dated the year before she passed away. For when you feel lost, the first line read, "You are always meant for more than they let you believe. The ring is yours, my darling. And more than that, the strength you doubt is already within you. When the time comes, stand tall, speak your truth, and know that love, real love, never asks you to beg." I pressed the letter to my chest. For a moment, everything blurred. The noise of the party faded. The years of feeling invisible cracked at the edges. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't wrong for feeling forgotten. They had stolen from me my belonging, my voice, my heritage. And now, it was time to take it back. Not by yelling, not by begging, not even by asking, by standing up, standing still, and letting the truth cut through the lies like glass through silk. I tucked the letter into my coat pocket. I smoothed my face into calm neutrality, and I walked back into the living room, unnoticed, unseen, just the way they liked it, for now. Because the next time they saw me, I wouldn't be the quiet, grateful daughter anymore. I would be something else entirely. And when it happened, when the truth came out, they wouldn't be able to pretend they didn't know. Not anymore. The days after the gathering moved like heavy fog, thick, silent, impossibly slow. I went about my routines, work, errands, polite small talk, with the same invisible thread wrapped tight around my throat. Always polite, always quiet, but underneath that practiced stillness, something had shifted. Not broken, no, that would have been easy. Shifted, rearranged, like the tectonic plates of a long-forgotten Earth, grinding silently until the eruption became inevitable. The letter burned in my coat pocket. Even when I wasn't touching it, it was a weight, a comfort, a vow. I began preparing, quietly, meticulously. I requested copies of my grandmother's will from the family lawyer, under the pretense of clarifying some details for personal archives. Nobody questioned me, why would they? I was the quiet one, the harmless one, the afterthought. And that was my greatest weapon now. When the documents arrived, the truth was laid bare on thick official paper. The ring wasn't the only thing my grandmother had left for me. There were savings, a small but beautiful piece of land outside town, and letters, so many letters addressed to me, never delivered, all signed, all witnessed, all legally binding. I sat at my kitchen table that night, reading through every word by the faint light of a single lamp, the rest of the house submerged in darkness. It was all there, clear as day, gifts that were meant for me, a legacy they had stolen, a love they had tried to erase. The next morning, I made an appointment with the family attorney, an older man who had known my grandmother well. He welcomed me into his office with a kind smile and a slightly puzzled look. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said gently. I didn't react. I only slid the letter across the desk, followed by the will, followed by the photographs I had quietly taken of my sister-in-law's hand, the stolen ring flashing on her finger. He read everything carefully, occasionally humming under his breath. When he looked up, his eyes were steady. "You have every right to reclaim what was left to you," he said simply, "and if you wish to pursue it, legally, it's ironclad." I nodded. My hands were steady. My voice was cool. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. We spent the next 2 weeks building the case. Not a lawsuit, not yet. I didn't want public spectacle, not unless they forced my hand. No. This would be clean, surgical, undeniable. Meanwhile, at family dinners and casual gatherings, I maintained the same serene mask. Polite smiles, soft nods, careful invisibility. They didn't suspect a thing. They were too busy making plans, celebrating the upcoming baby, arguing over what to name it, discussing how my land could be sold to fund a new house for my brother's growing family. I sat quietly through it all, sipping tea, feeling like a ghost standing at the edge of my own life. And I waited, because timing was everything. I chose a Sunday afternoon, a family barbecue at my parents' house. Everyone would be there. No distractions, no excuses. I walked in carrying a plain black folder tucked under my arm. Inside, my grandmother's original will, the new evidence, a notarized demand for the return of all stolen items and properties. And my voice sharpened after a decade of silence. The barbecue was already underway. Laughter spilled from the backyard. Music played from an old speaker. Children shrieked and chased each other across the lawn. Perfect. I stepped onto the deck, the sun warm against my back, and cleared my throat, softly, once. Nobody turned. Nobody noticed. Of course they didn't. So I did it again, louder, and finally, they looked up, annoyed, confused, impatient. I smiled. Not with warmth, with finality. "I have something to say," I announced. My voice cut through the chatter like a blade through silk. Murmurs rippled across the group. My mother frowned. My brother exchanged a look with his wife. I opened the folder carefully, deliberately, and began to read. Word for word, line by line, the truth poured out, unrelenting, undeniable, beautifully brutal. About the ring, the stolen inheritance, the forged decisions, the deliberate lies. I read with the steady calm of a storm that had waited 10 years to break free. No anger, no tears, just facts, cold, jaw sharp, devastating facts. When I finished, I closed the folder, tucked it back under my arm, and looked up. The silence was deafening. My mother's face had drained of color. My brother's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. My sister-in-law looked like she wanted to melt into the deck. Good, for once. They were speechless. For once, they couldn't twist it, deny it, laugh it off. I had taken back my voice, and with it, every piece of myself they had tried to erase. And as I stood there, steady and unflinching, I realized this wasn't just about a ring, or land, or even money. It was about reclaiming my place, my worth, my name, and I had done it. Without screaming, without begging, without lowering myself to their level. Just the quiet, unstoppable power of truth. And they would never forget it. The silence didn't end with that afternoon. It stretched out like a second skin, clinging to everything we touched. Days passed, then weeks. Nobody reached out to me. No apologies, no explanations, no desperate excuses, only silence. And it was the sweetest thing I had ever heard. I imagined them sitting at home, stewing in shame and anger. Not because they regretted what they had done, but because they had been caught. Because, for once, they couldn't spin the story into something that made them look noble. I had taken that power away, and it terrified them. Meanwhile, I lived my life. Small steps, at first. Tiny freedoms I hadn't realized I craved. I changed my phone number. I redirected my mail. I removed their names from my emergency contacts. I donated the gifts they had given me over the years, the ones they thought would buy my loyalty. It was like pulling splinters from my skin. Painful, necessary, liberating. Their absence felt strange at first, like a limb that had been amputated. There were phantom aches, moments where I almost reached for my phone out of habit. But those moments passed, and with each one, I breathed a little easier. The lawyer handled the rest. Official letters were sent. Legal ownership was restored. The land, the ring, the financial accounts, everything my grandmother had meant for me. They tried, of course. My brother sent a half-hearted text. Maybe we can work something out. It was just a misunderstanding. My mother left a voicemail, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We're still family, darling. Let's not let this little thing ruin that. Little thing. As if 10 years of betrayal could be smoothed over like a wrinkle in a tablecloth. I didn't answer either of them. Silence was my final gift to them, the only language they truly understood. At work, I flourished. I focused. I grew. I took classes I had always wanted to try, painting, creative writing, even pottery. At first, it felt indulgent, like I was living someone else's life. But then it started to feel real, like maybe this had always been mine. I had just been too weighed down to reach for it. I met new people, not friends of the family, not people who whispered behind their hands. Real people. People who didn't expect me to apologize for existing. People who laughed at my jokes without an edge of cruelty. People who saw me, really saw me, and didn't flinch. There was a man eventually, gentle, steady, the kind who listened without trying to fix you, because he understood some things weren't meant to be fixed, just held. We weren't in love yet. Maybe we never would be, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in my life, I wasn't building my world around someone else's approval. I was choosing, freely. One evening, as the sun bled gold across my small, quiet apartment, I sat with a cup of tea and realized I didn't miss them. Not really. Not the real them. Maybe I missed the fantasy, the family I had wanted them to be. But fantasies were just stories we told ourselves to survive. I didn't need stories anymore. I had truth. And it was more than enough. The next family event came and went without a call, without an invitation. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my brother's wife had given birth, a baby boy. They had named him after my father. The thought should have hurt. Once, it would have gutted me. Now, it was just a passing observation, a piece of news about strangers, because that's what they were now, strangers. I closed my eyes, leaned back against my chair, and let the peace settle into my bones. No rage, no grief, just a cool, steady emptiness. And in that emptiness, I found something beautiful: space, room to breathe, room to dream, room to be. I wasn't the daughter they wanted. I wasn't the sister they favored. I wasn't the pawn they could maneuver anymore. I was just myself. And for the first time, that was enough. Time, they say, dulls the sharpest pain. But I don't think that's true. I think time teaches you how to live with it, how to let it sit beside you without letting it take you under. The months turned into a year, and then 2, and then I stopped counting altogether. My life, once so entangled in their approval and cruelty, grew in 100 tiny directions. A new job, a weekend getaway with friends, books I devoured under warm blankets, laughter real, aching, chest-deep laughter that I thought I had lost forever. Every now and then, I'd see them across town at the grocery store, at a traffic light. Frozen in time inside some glossy family photo posted online, they always looked the same. Tight smiles, hungry eyes, desperate to convince the world they were happy, perfect, whole. And I didn't look away anymore. I didn't hide. I didn't ache to be part of it. I simply nodded once, like acknowledging the memory of an old scar, and kept walking. They never approached me. Maybe they knew better now, or maybe they simply didn't recognize who I had become. Either way, I was grateful, because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something you owed to the people who broke you. It was something you gifted yourself when you were ready. And I was ready, not to excuse them, not to forget, but to lay the burden down at last, to refuse to carry their sins on my back any longer. I was free, truly, finally free. One rainy afternoon, I cleaned out an old box tucked deep in my closet. Among the faded photos and brittle letters, I found a small velvet pouch. Inside was the ring, the real one, my grandmother's ring, the one they had thought they could steal away and give to someone more deserving. Somehow, it had found its way back to me. Maybe my grandmother had been watching. Maybe fate had intervened. Maybe it didn't matter how, only that it was here, in my hand, shining quietly under the gray light. I slipped it onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me all along. A few weeks later, I took a trip alone. No agenda, no demands, no expectations, just a simple promise to myself to live fully, without shame, without permission. I stood on a high cliff overlooking the ocean, the wind clawing at my jacket, the salt stinging my eyes, and I laughed until my ribs ached, until the sky seemed to echo the sound back to me, not out of bitterness, not out of rage, but out of the sheer wild joy of being alive. The past was still there. Behind me, a long road littered with betrayals and silences and heartbreaks. But it was no longer the map I followed. It was simply the story that had brought me here. And here was good. Here was mine. Here was enough. I don't know if they think about me now. Maybe they tell themselves they did nothing wrong. Maybe they sit with a hollow in their chest they don't know how to name. Maybe they have forgotten me entirely. It doesn't matter, because I remember. I remember who I was before they taught me to doubt myself. I remember the girl who stood silent for too long. And I remember the woman who finally chose to speak and never looked back. If you've ever been made to feel small, invisible, replaceable, hear me now, you are not. You never were. And you don't need their permission to live a life so rich, so full, so breathtakingly yours, that they can only stand at the edges and wonder how they ever thought they could break you. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes, it's the people you find along the way, the ones who see you, hear you, love you, not for what you can give them, but simply because you exist. I chose peace over proving myself, and that was the best revenge of all. The wind howled around me, carrying the past out over the sea. I watched it go. No anger, no sadness, no regret, just freedom, pure and simple, mine.